Hey everyone, for those of you who have been fasting with us and praying for our nation and praying for the upcoming election, I just wanted to give you a little bit of encouragement. I wanted to read a story out of the book of Ezra. You know, it's one of those highly popular books that everyone dives into. Anyways, just wanted to read a little story out of Ezra and actually not even a story, just a passage. And this takes place when the people had been captive in Babylon and now they're being released section by section to go back to Jerusalem and to journey back to Jerusalem. So I wanted to take a look at this one passage and hopefully it will encourage you as we're continuing in this fast. So this is Ezra chapter 8 verses 21 through 23. Then I proclaimed a fast, and there at the river of Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him the right way for us and our little ones and all our possessions. For I was ashamed to request of the king an escort of soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy on the road, because we had spoken to the king, saying, the hand of our God is upon all those for good who seek him, but his power and his wrath are against all those who forsake him. So we fasted and entreated our God for this, and he answered our prayer. So essentially what has happened is people are being allowed to leave Babylon and return to Jerusalem, but the road home is actually full of robbers and bandits and just dangerous people, and they're bringing with them many of the treasures of Jerusalem that had gone into captivity into Babylon. And so it's a dangerous trip, and they're carrying valuables. And so Nehemiah actually makes this same trip, and you can read in Nehemiah, and he takes a little different path, I guess, as opposed to praying and fasting for safety on the trip. He actually accepts a military escort from Babylon, and he takes this military escort and they go back to Jerusalem and they're safe. But Ezra looks at it differently. And he had been kind of this whole time talking to the king and making proclamations to the people saying, God is faithful, and for those who seek him and are good, he's right there with them. And for those who forsake him, his wrath is against them. And so he wants to sort of live up to that. But let's break this down and look at this kind of, verse by verse. So in verse 21, Ezra proclaims a fast specifically to ask for direction from God. Literally asking for direction, which way should we go to avoid robbers and bandits and all these people that are looking to harm us. And so, they're leaving Babylon, they're going back to Jerusalem. It's going to be dangerous. They've got these valuables and they ask for direction. And this is, what we do a lot of times, but in a more figurative sense, whereas they were literally asking for directions. We oftentimes come to God and say, we just need direction in our life. What do we do next? And right now we're praying for direction for our country, and we've proclaimed a fast. So we're tracking right here with Ezra because we've proclaimed this fast. We're praying, we're together in this, and we're asking God for direction for our nation and for direction in this upcoming election. And we want to be open to hearing what he has to say. Well, in verse 22, it says, Ezra did not want to accept help because he had declared that God would protect them. It says he was ashamed to ask. It's really what shame would be more like, he would be embarrassed to ask because he's been saying that God is faithful. God will answer this prayer. And now he wants to actually act accordingly to what he's been saying. Because he truly believed what he proclaimed, he acted on that. His behavior followed what he believed. He didn't make his beliefs based on what his behavior was, but rather because he so strongly believed that God would be faithful, that if they asked God for protection, they would be protected. He was willing to go on this journey without any protection at all, but to trust in God. I love seeing that kind of faith, that level where we say, we are believing for something, we're praying for something, so we're going to act in accordance with what we're praying. We're going to just make the assumption that God is going to answer our prayer. That's what Ezra did. And then it says in verse 23, God answered his prayer. After fasting and praying, God answered their prayer, and they arrived in Jerusalem completely safe. And I guess my question that I would ask in looking at this passage is, do we really expect God to answer our prayer? We're praying and fasting for our nation. What does our speech reveal about whether or not we expect God to actually answer our prayer in this? Sometimes people, we're praying for God's will to be done. We're praying for God to give us direction, God to show us who to vote for, or God to reveal himself to his nation, God to create truth to come out of, the media, for Christians to be able to discern what the truth is, even for unbelievers to be able to discern what the truth is in the midst of kind of this madness. And my question is this: if we're praying for those things, then what does our speech, or what is the things that we're saying, reflect about whether or not we really expect God to answer? In this time of prayer and fasting, in all the models of prayer and fasting that I see in the Bible, one thing that kind of runs consistently throughout is this expectation that if we've put ourselves before God, that he's going to answer those prayers, and then we can go forward with that answer. But in modern day times, when I see people fasting, very often I see them fasting for something, but then in conversation, talking about it as if God wasn't going to answer that prayer. Kind of we're praying for unity for the nation, but then we go, man, if so-and-so gets elected, we're just going to see, civil war erupt, or if so-and-so gets elected, people are going to riot, or if this happens, whatever it is. And my question is, if we're praying for unity in the nation, and then we're confessing that the opposite of that is going to happen, what is that saying about the faith of our confession? There is authority in the words that we speak. And so what I want to encourage you throughout this time of prayer and fasting is pay attention to what you're praying for. If you're praying for something and you're believing for something and you're fasting for something, then let's start talking like that's something that's going to actually happen. Like, let's actually believe that God is going to answer our prayers, because every time that we see these prayers and fasts happening in the Bible, they're always done with an expectation. And generally you end up with a verse 23. Where verse 23 says, so we fasted and entreated our God for this, and he answered our prayer. When Daniel fasted, his prayer was answered. When Esther fasted, had the nation of Israel fast for her, their prayers were answered. When the disciples couldn't cast out the demon, Jesus said, this kind comes out by prayer and fasting. We see this time of expectation. When the disciples were trying to find out who was going to be, kind of next in their line, it says, or who they were going to send out. It says they fasted and prayed, and after they'd fasted and prayed, they sent out people. And we can very much make the assumption there that they got an answer, because they wouldn't have sent someone out if they didn't know who to send out. So there's always this expectation that God is going to answer the prayer. And my encouragement to you is, let's start believing, like truly believing that God is going to answer our prayers. So I wish you the best in this. I know that sometimes the fasting has been harder for others than some, but it's okay. It doesn't matter if you've messed up. It doesn't matter if you even haven't started and you want to jump in right now. We're not legalistic about this. God's not legalistic about this. The point is, let's come together. We've still got a few weeks left. Let's get together. Let's pray and fast for our nation and for this upcoming election.